Greetings and welcome, everyone. Thank you so much, all of you, from joining us from so many different countries. It is my great pleasure to welcome you to this webinar in the Science Policy Updates for All series, organized in the context of the work of the Scientific Advisory Committee of the UN Food Systems Coordination Hub. Today, we will discuss agency in food systems transformation. Who has the power to shape food systems? This is a timely conversation because food systems transformation is not only about policies, technologies, financing, and implementation. It is very much about people, power, voice, representation, and the ability to influence decisions that affect food systems at local, national, and global levels. During this webinar, we will explore agency as a critical dimension of inclusive, equitable, and rights-based food systems transformation. We will reflect on who has the power to participate, who is represented in decision making, whose knowledge is recognized, and which structural barriers continue to limit meaningful participation and influence. We begin with an introductory presentation by Professor Barbara Burlingame, who will frame the concept of agency and explain why it matters for food systems transformation. We will then hear from Dr. Hilal Elva, who will address agency from a human rights-based approach. And this will be followed by Professor Nitya Rao, who will focus on women's agency and gender justice in food systems transformation. We will then open the floor for questions and conclude with key reflections. Participants are invited to submit questions through the Q&A function throughout the webinar. We will collect these questions, and we have Ludovica with us, who will help us to bring these questions into the discussion during the final segment of the webinar. It is now my great pleasure to invite Professor Barbara Burlingame, SAC co-chair and Professor of Public Health, Nutrition and Food Systems at Massey University, to begin the webinar with a presentation entitled, "Who Holds Power in the Transformation of Food Systems?" Barbara will introduce the topic of agency and help us to situate it within the broad agenda of food systems transformation. Barbara?
Thank you very much, Shakuntala. I'm very happy to be here and be part of this webinar and to talk about agency as one of the important fundamental issues related to the transformation of food systems. So my first slide, I'd like to talk about some background. Next slide, please. Why agency has been considered so fundamental to so many issues related to food systems, including food security. It was until about 2019, 2020, there had been identified in the definition of food security 4 pillars that defined food security, and they were access, availability, utilization, and stability. But a group of people in the high-level panel of experts had long been discussing that there were 2 other fundamental pillars defining food security, and they needed to be included. So in the high-level panel of experts consultation and report called Food Security and Nutrition, Building a Global Narrative Towards 2030, the proposition was made that sustainability and agency should be part of that definition. Agency in this document refers to the capacity of individuals or groups to make their own decisions about what foods they eat, produce, how that food is produced, how it's processed, and distributed within food systems and their ability to engage in processes that shape food systems, policies, and governance. Now, this was presented to the Committee on World Food Security, and in fact, to date, they haven't endorsed that. Doesn't matter, because the high-level panel of experts has its own agency, and this document and the definition of including agency is now widely distributed through the scholarly literature. People are using it, governments are using it, even Wikipedia has included the two new dimensions as part of the definition of food security. So that's an important context. Agency is fundamental to the definition of food security. Next slide. But who really does speak for science in the race to transform global food systems? This was another issue that a group of scientists was pondering, including myself and two other members of the Council of the International Union of Nutritional Sciences, because within the context of science governance, not just the IUNS, but also the International Union of Food Scientists and Technology and many others under that international science umbrella, the structure or the framework is one agency or one organization represents science for that discipline. IUNS, International Union of Nutritional Sciences, one agency in a country is able to influence policy, to have voting rights, et cetera, within the nutrition science community. We didn't think that was necessarily a good thing because, as we said in the introduction to this paper, published a few months ago, science thrives on diversity, critical debate, and the inclusion of marginalized voices. Food and nutrition governments, and indeed food systems governance, can, and sometimes does, unfortunately, institutionalize exclusion. And this is, again, where agency comes into its own, the necessity of agency for deciding or influencing who speaks for science. Next. The other issue that became critical for science and policy interfaces was deciding what really represented strength of evidence when we're talking about evidence-based policy, and all policy instruments are evidence-based. So one of the things that was dismaying some of us was that traditional knowledge was sometimes relegated to the bottom of the strength of evidence pyramid, that it was considered the weakest form of evidence when deciding policy. And we saw that sometimes at play in some of these policy discussions, where the agency actually making the policy disregarded recommendations sometimes from indigenous peoples, let's say, as being anecdotal or in some way folklore, legend, but not proper science. So two publications changed that, and these have been well received by the scientific community and the policy-making community. The first was a report out of the Global Hub on Indigenous Peoples' Food and Knowledge Systems, this WIFLA paper shown on the left, and the other was a paper published in Nature Food called Rethinking Hierarchies of Evidence for Sustainable Food Systems. And in this, there were a lot of statements that really resonated with the scientific community for their truth. For example, Indigenous peoples' traditional knowledge must be seen as having methodological, substantive, and contextual strengths equal to or even beyond those of many dominant scientific study designs, that these are accumulated through repeated cycles of induction and deduction, the scientific method, and informed by and dynamically adjusted over decades, centuries, even millennia, with systematic observations, experiences, and trials and errors of practice. Substantively, Indigenous peoples' traditional knowledge holds much relevance to contemporary food systems challenges and a detailed understanding of the complex socio-ecological mechanisms. Next slide. So there are, agency comes in the form of stakeholders, but also rights holders. And there are these rights-based instruments. The next two speakers will talk in more detail about them that really give the kind of legal agency to individuals and groups. So this is just some of the rights-based instruments that can relate to agency and certainly relate to food systems governance, starting with the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, going back to the 1970s, all the way up to the UN DROP, the UN Declaration on the Rights of Peasants, in the late 2010s. What this slide shows, though, is an analysis for one country on how these rights-based instruments have been adopted and implemented in a country. And these, by the way, all have relevance to food systems governance. So I did this for Australia. It's been done for other countries. It can be done for every country, looking at what among these rights-based instruments have been ratified or not by a country and supported through national implementation, and how they are and how they affect agency in a country. Right to food, for example, and the rights of women will be talked about later in this webinar. Next slide. So we did an analysis of some of the national pathways, and we see that agency is there, often hidden in plain sight. Agency is implied through different vocabulary. It's implied with language on choice or resources, participation, and governance. So these are some examples taken from national pathway documents. Kiribati, Kuwait, and Latvia talk about choice in food systems, and that is a reflection of agency. But a stronger reflection of agency is on resources and livelihood, and we see that in the middle frame. Nigeria, Uganda, Sri Lanka, just some examples of where agency is implied in some of the detail of the national pathways. And then the strongest of all is voice and governance. And we've illustrated that with three countries. Federated States of Micronesia, for example, there were more than 400 participants across 17 dialogue days and related to developing the national pathways. These were community-led and managed and to affect change. Cameroon, they had consultations in 10 regions, and they brought together public, private, and research and civil society actors. Zimbabwe is another example, commitments from consumers, women, youth, UN networks in the pathway implementation. So national pathways, they offer entry points to strengthen agency, but more attention is needed to turn participation into sustained decision-making power. Next slide. And this is my final slide. I just want to go through some key messages. The first one is that people and groups need to engage, not just as consumers or beneficiaries, but individually and collectively through consultation and participation as rights holders, or at least stakeholders, with enforceable agency. And because of these rights-based instruments on the previous slide, agency is enforceable for rights holders. Next is the acknowledgement that evidence is not just empirical science, but it's also lived science of Indigenous peoples' knowledge systems that needs to be understood and acknowledged. Rights, sovereignty, conflict of interest, safeguards, these are preconditions for credible national policies and standards. and to policymakers. It is necessary to be accountable at all levels of power, all levels of decision making, and all levels of governance. And the more agency there is within a country, the more accountability there will be for the policymakers. And this ensures that advisory processes reflect diversity of legitimate knowledge systems and disciplines rather than relying on a single institution or a single perspective, which unfortunately we sometimes see. And then to rights holders and stakeholders, I encourage you and through these processes, encourage that you claim and use your agency. It won't necessarily be given to you, but you can claim it. And one very simple thing that you can do is know your national conveners and read the National Pathway documents. And here's the website. It's very easy to find. If you don't want to write down this URL, you can easily search who are the national conveners and where are the National Pathway documents, and easily find this. And maybe Ludovica can put this in the chat box. And I think during the conversations we'll have at the end of the presentations, we'll talk a little bit more about claiming agency. And I think that's my last slide. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Barbara, for setting the scene so clearly and reminding us that agency is central for meaningful and equitable food systems transformation. I am now pleased to invite Hilal Elver, SAC co-chair and former UN Special Rapporteur on the right to food, to speak. Hilal will address agency from a human rights-based approach in the context of food systems transformation. Hilal.
Thank you very much, Shakuntala. Thank you very much, Barbara, and thank you very much all you are listening us. Now I'm going a little bit more legal perspective, how agency combined with the human rights-based approach or the human rights principle. But the whole idea is using this to transform a food system to a just, equitable, and sustainable. So this is all idea. How do we use agency with the human rights concept that we can reach more just system? My first presentation, my first point is basically every kind of human rights. It could be right to food, right to education, no matter what it is. All economic and social rights use this human rights-based approach to get the fair system. Then I'm going to go to the food system. So without agency, bringing normative legal principles of human rights to an actual life is impossible, because these are in the law books sitting there, but we have to need agency to raise them, to know them, to use them. So agency is a subject of the rights. Agency is right holder, as Barbara clearly explained. Of course, individual and community. Basically, human rights principles look at the individuals, but now the new generation of human rights, for instance, the right to environment, right to water, now the community-based human rights agency is also very important. There's another agency, as again Barbara mentioned, states. They are basically duty bearers, and also corporations. They have the responsibility also. So we have to look at all this together. Without a right holder, there will not be any rights that can be operationalized. So that's a very important thing. Second, please. Can we go? Yeah. What is basically we listen always human rights-based approach, but maybe we don't know exactly what that means because we talk about the right to food, but sometimes human rights-based approach is important. This is basically simple, a strategy that integrates human rights principle into organizational policies, laws, and social initiatives. Basically, it serves as a foundation for sustainable social change. And also, human rights-based approach is not just a moral imperative, but it's a strategic necessity for building a fairer world. So that's why human rights-based approach has to be used by all agencies, not only the agencies that we are empowering them. So this is an important part of it. Agencies will be different from our perspective. Agency is going to be basically need support in order to get, for instance, we are not going to corporate agency in this space, but we are talking about women's, indigenous peoples, and all peoples that needs to be supported. So next slide, please. So again, Barbara mentioned a little bit diversity, equity, and inclusion. These are basically when we use the human rights-based approach, because they are basically promoted diversity, equity, and inclusion promoted by the human rights-based approach. So we need diversity in the decision making. We need equity among the several agencies. We need inclusion to support agency or empowered agency. So they are defense, this what we call DAE, DEE in many parts of the world now. It is not very prominent, but we really have to put it very embracing human rights-based approach is not just a moral imperative, it's a strategic necessity for building a fairer world. So these are basically human rights principles that we can implement for every right. Now, how to transform current food system by implementing human rights-based approach. So next slide, please. So what we are trying to do, we are trying to transforming just food system. Just food system means from the global big time food system by the controlled by the big industrial agriculture corporation to local food system, to make the people first, to make the first people's interest that they basically are smallholder farmers, producers, and women and indigenous people. So we are trying to promote this one. So that's why we have our own agencies. What we try to do from global system to reach the local food system, we are trying to not promote only profitable actions or not export-oriented global food system, but basically we are trying to find the local producers' priorities, and their voice should be raised and it should be equalized, because there is no equal power in the food system. There is a power imbalances. How we answer this power imbalances through the human rights-based approach. Next slide, please. So in order to do that, we have some kind of operational implementations. So what we should do, implementing human rights-based, how do we implement human rights-based approach? These are basically several kind of issues that we have to deal with it. Implementing human rights-based approach combined with agency to transform human system, we have to change the food policies from a mere market commodity focusing to an unalienable human rights principles. So in order to make this human rights principles, we need operationalize. How do we operationalize? First, we have to choose and prioritize the agency in food system. We already talked from the right to food perspective, smallholder farmers, women, and community-based organization. And indigenous peoples are considered our agency that we should promote, right holders. Then shift to participatory governance. How do we do that? Ensure local food system actors, again, the same agency, direct representation in decision-making spaces, not only participation, but direct representations. For instance, advocating creation of municipal or regional food policy councils, which we have been doing in many parts of the world, to give communities a voice in shaping regulations and public procurement, and support agroecological and regenerative farming practices that restores decision-making power regarding seeds, land use, and local ecosystem. So next slide, you'll be more clearly see what does that mean, operational principles. How do we do that? We need a participation, as mentioned. It's a very important thing, but also making a decision. Without a decision-making, participation is not important. Accountability, this is more legal perspective. This means institutions and duty bearers can be questioned and must respond when if commitments are not fulfilled. This is a very, very important part of the agency. We have to ask the question when we against the duty bearers. So non-discrimination against part of the policies that identify and address barriers faced by specific groups. Everyone must have equal access and opportunities. Transparency is very important. We have to know what kind of public information we need, where the incentives are going, what are the promotions that goes to which group of the agencies. Empowerment is also very important. People know their rights and have the capacity, information, and space to act on them. Without the empowerment, this is the basically civil society organization should do the empowerment, to take the information from the books, from the policies, bringing to the local communities. So human dignity, basically what the foundation of the human rights and rule of law. As already mentioned, we have to have right to food and constitutional protection of the all economic and social rights. Without a democratic system, none of the operational principles would be available, applicable, and transformation. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Hilal, for grounding agency within the human rights approach, which is fundamental for ensuring that food systems transformation includes all and at the same time must benefit all. I will now invite Nitya Rao, SAC member, Professor of Gender and Development at the School of International Development, University of East Anglia. Nitya will speak on women's agency and gender justice in food systems transformation. This is also relevant with 2026 being declared as the International Year of the Woman Farmer. Nitya, over to you.
Thanks so much, Shakuntala, and also Barbara and Hilal for setting out the context so well. Could we move to the next slide, please, Ludovica? So I think just to reiterate, I guess Hilal has just spoken that the importance of human rights for a just food system and an equitable food system, paying specific attention to marginalized groups, in terms of fair and shared responsibilities, burdens, and so on. And I think we've mentioned so far women and indigenous peoples and so on. But I just wanted to add an additional point here in terms of people often have multiple identities at the same time. So you could be a poor woman, or you could be an indigenous woman, or a lower caste, or a racial minority, woman or man. And this could also add what we call sort of in the literature as intersectionality. So you have different identities which actually might work together to multiply the injustices that you face. So I think I just wanted to make that additional point. And I think, as Hilal has rightly pointed out, in order to get to a just food system, you have various principles, the 7 principles for implementation. But I think, in terms of the basic minimum, what we are talking about is that everybody has access to healthy food, to live in a healthy environment, access to decent work, because you need a livelihood in order to be able to afford healthy food. And very importantly, again, underlying is the agency and the freedom to engage with these food systems. Next slide, please. So I think, again, Barbara showed a slide about the various legal frameworks that exist, and I will focus in on women's agency and gender justice to say that we also have quite a good legal framework globally, starting with the CEDAW, the Convention on Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination that Barbara showed, the Beijing Platform for Action, which came in 1995, and more recently, and specifically on food systems, we have the voluntary guidelines on gender equality and women's and girls' empowerment in 2021, adopted by the CFS. And last year at COP30, actually the Belém Gender Action Plan was also pretty forward looking in terms of putting in place certain gender equality principles, which included things like good health, attention to women's unpaid work, bodily integrity, freedom from violence, and so on. And as Shakuntala said, I think 2026, by FAO, the declaration as the International Year of Women Farmers, has really provided an impetus to start paying attention to some of these policy guidelines and frameworks that have been in existence now for quite some time. Next, please. Next slide, please. Yeah. Thank you. And I think with women particularly, I think it has become very critical to sort of pay attention to this, because we know that despite these 50 years since the CEDAW in 1979, that a lot of attention on equality and removal of discrimination. And we know that, globally from the various reports on gender and agri-food systems, this data is from that 40% of women globally are employed in agri-food systems, but in sub-Saharan Africa, it's 66%. In South Asia, it's 71%. But when we look at, for example, the ratio of female to male average wages or earnings, well, this has improved. I think when you take as an average, women still earn only 82 cents for every dollar earned by men. So, and this is, of course, a global average. In some parts of the world, this is much worse than in other parts of the world. And the reasons for this are that women are mostly doing own account work, or they are seen as unpaid family workers contributing to family farms, but without getting recognition for it. And the other big issue, of course, is all the unpaid care work, care of the environment, care of, okay. I think Ludovica, somebody says they can't view the slides, but I'm able to see it. So I think unpaid care work is very important. It's a big chunk of the work, and it is usually performed by women. The graph on the right is really on the gender gap in ownership of land, and this is FAO reporting on the Sustainable Development Goal Indicator 5.8.1 on equal access to land, that in 40 out of 46 countries reporting, actually men have much greater ownership and also secure tenure rights over agricultural land than do women. So I think despite since 1979 arguing for gender equality, there remains a lot of difference, a long way still to go. Next slide, please. So this is a tool actually which has been also developed by various scholars and using some of the data, especially reporting data on the national pathways. It's called the Gender Analysis of Agricultural Policy, or the GAPO tool. And this GAPO tool, really, they have looked at policy documents, about 255 policy documents, to see how far do they recognize gender, how far do they then have implementation mechanisms built into it, and monitoring systems. So it's along 4 key dimensions. One is the prioritization of gender equality. That's the top 3 bars. And you see in the top 2 particularly that quite a few of these documents, more than 50% of the documents, are actually recognizing that women's roles and challenges in agriculture and rural development. So they have recognition in the policy documents. But when we look at the latter 3, or the 3 blocks beneath the top 1, which is institutional capacity and women's participation, national and international contextualization, and gender responsive monitoring, evaluation, and budgeting, you find that actually very few documents, less than 25% of the documents, actually have budgets, have implementation mechanisms. So all the things that Hilal was talking about in terms of ensuring participation. So you see that promote rural women's participation in policy formulation actually is the lowest. It's less than 20% of documents actually say that women should be involved or should participate in decision making within policy making processes. So I think this is a very useful tool to tell us where we currently stand. And it's great that we are recognizing this kind of inequality or injustice, but we still need to go far in order to move ahead. Next, please. And again, I think like Barbara, we did some analysis of the National Food Systems Transformation Pathways. And since 2021, when the UN Food Systems Summit was held, various governments have been contributing, have been reporting voluntarily. And I guess you find a range again, just like a range in terms of taking different voices. You find some countries with much stronger integration, really focusing on institutional capacity building, on participation, like Bangladesh, Cuba, Guatemala, Costa Rica. Then you have in between a lot of countries like India, Kenya, Rwanda, which are paying attention to women's collectives, giving production support, but not really giving them representation or voice in terms of participation. And then many countries with very limited integration, which have some general statements on inclusion, but no specific policy or budgetary support. Next, please. So I'll just give you 2 examples. And I think this again is from the bottom picture, is from some of the coordination hubs work also in pushing this forward. But the case of Ethiopia, that 1995, the Constitution, Article 3 already recognized women's equal rights to inherit, use, transfer, and control land. And there was a big certification process launched after that, with a lot of district level committees being formed with women's membership, but actually very little moved. So they then realized by 2000 that not much was moving. And this was because the family code was out of sync with this land administration code. So as per the family code, the men owned the land. And while the land administration code gave equal rights. So then you had to do something about addressing that challenge. And I think all this legal process has also taken time to show how interconnected and intersectional some of the legal frameworks are. So even if there is a legal framework, often there could be other ways of not implementing by using other kinds of legal codes. So how do we align all of these to remove discrimination is very important. And I think in 2025, after the +4 UNFSS in Addis Ababa in Ethiopia, I think the hub has also facilitated the setting up of a science policy society interface, particularly to encourage this very crucial dimension of participation and leadership of youth and women. Next, please. I'll skip this, but I think there are some interesting recent moves which are happening. This example is from the Indian state of Odisha, where Shakuntala has also been doing a lot of work, and they have really tried to build institutional capacity through a gender responsive cell in the ministry, the development of gender responsive tools, and also registration of women as farmers. Next, please. And I think this is kind of key that we have, in many ways, recognized women, as I said, using the GAPO tool as economic actors and agents. How do we move towards the next steps in terms of ensuring gender justice and ensuring women's agency? To some extent, the examples have shown that there is an emphasis on redistributing resources like skills training, land, credit, and so on. Where there's a real gap, I think where we haven't moved is in terms of representation in governance is clearly lacking. Institutional mechanisms for mainstreaming gender equality are not really developed. And this is kind of, I hope this will go through, but on the left, I have just put a very latest from this week in India that one of the Indian states, Maharashtra, has brought in a bill on women farmers' entitlement into the state legislature. Earlier this week. It will be discussed over this month and the next month during the legislative meetings. And we hope that this might be the first bill in India to be enacted into an act which actually guarantees the human rights of women farmers. So next, please. And that will be my last slide. So I guess I've already mentioned many of these things, but again, for different stakeholders in terms of policymakers, researchers, and practitioners, I think the recognition is very important of equal entitlements, whether it is women, whether it is indigenous people. This needs to be backed up by resources, because I think change or transformation cannot happen on its own, especially when we are talking about marginalized groups. They need the resources to bring about that transformation. For women in particular, I think the sole responsibility as carers needs to be addressed in terms of sharing of the burden of domestic work. The whole institutional norms, the inequality in terms of voice, agency, leadership in decision-making processes remains the sticking point. And this needs to be addressed across all levels. And finally, I would really argue for learning from more bottom-up, community-led, collective empowerment programs that simultaneously address these different needs. I think the hierarchy of evidence, I think listening to the bottom-up community voices, women's voices, indigenous voices is really key. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Nitya. And it is really good that you have given us some there. When we hear from the three speakers, there is so much to be done. But it was very good to hear from you that there are movements, there are actions at many different levels taking place, also at governmental level, and that we are moving forward in order to ensure that agency becomes important when we talk about food systems transformation. I will now open the floor for questions, and I invite participants to use the Q&A function, and if possible, to indicate whether the question is addressed to a specific speaker or to all speakers. Please also raise your hand, and Ludovika, who is assisting us, will be calling on you to speak. Thank you. So Ludovika, maybe have there been any questions in the Q&A that has already been submitted? We can begin with those.
Yeah, thank you, Shakuntala. Thank you to all the speakers. We do have 3 questions. The first one is addressed to Hilal, and it says, "Hi Hilal, thank you for your presentation. A policy can formally endorse gender equality while still denying women legal rights to land, inheritance, and credit. From your experience as a special rapporteur, what is the most significant legal barrier you have observed, and what would realistically compel states to address it?" The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The question, actually, you are absolutely right. I keep thinking when Nitya was talking about the new laws are coming or they are in the parliament or already a law but never implemented. It's just in the law books. That's why we are pushing agencies. Agency is important to push them. If we don't have an agency, we can't really raise our voice. In our reports, all the special rapporteurs mention on that, because the most significant legal barrier, I would say most significant barriers are not legal, but sociological. So we really have to change our cultural understanding of the role of the women in relation to patriarchal system or class system, sex system, all religious rules that put women behind the scenes. So the problem is not legal. The problem is not even political, sociological, and religious, and the cultural. We really have to maybe educate our children as a women to bring the next generation, boys and girls, that they are equal. Even they are equal in the law books, but they are not equal in the corporations, is in the farms, in the school, is in the PhD programs. We all see the differences because women have a lot of work to do. As Nitya mentioned, the women farmers has to deal with their non-paid workers. They have to take care of the children, they have to take care of the elderly, they have to take care of everything. That's why they never ever make a decision that profit making, only how to deal the nutritional food for the villages. So World Bank sometimes discuss all these things. Oh, we give this some kind of opportunity women, but they don't do most profitable action. Yes, because profitability is not important for women, because they have to take care of the people. So we see them that's why I miss the special rapporteurship. The missions are extremely important now. They don't do the mission because of the Human Rights Council doesn't have a budget. Everything is about budget. Now special rapporteurs cannot even go to mission, only once a year. Maybe they have to make it clear. So instead of going forward, unfortunately, we go to backwards. It's a very negative answer. Sorry, but the young generation should really focus on these issues, that they can do better future.
Thank you so much, Hilal. Ludovica, can we take the next question?
Yeah, thank you so much. I see there's Patrick who would like to take the floor. Patrick, the floor is yours. And if you're not able to talk, thank you. The floor is yours.
Yeah, good evening. Here I'm in Kenya. How's everyone?
Good, thank you.
Bye.
Yeah, I'm Patrick. I'm from Kenya, and I'm leading an organization called Linda Mazingira Initiative Kenya. Linda Mazingira is a youth-led organization that does matters of climate change and environment. And also I'm coordinating the civil society organizations in Western Kenya that does basically the issue of climate change, environment, peace, and agroecology. I'm so much happy to be here in these discussions. And so far I'm touched on issue of gender inclusivity, the youth involvement, basically on implementation of food system. But now also let's talk about my concern is about the impact of climate change in terms of agriculture and the drought and water scarcity that we're experiencing basically in Eastern Africa, and also the issue of flooding that affects, that strips about our crops, our nutrition, and whatever about our children in both Africa and globally. and also the role of the civil society organizations in implementation on the grassroots level. We have talked about many policies, many frameworks that we have. Now my question is, how are these policies implemented? Implementation of these policies. Then the issue of the community engagement. I'm happy also to talk about engaging the young people, basically in schools and even the community. So which is very important. And then also the issue of funding resources. In order to implement and have a viable food system, we need seed banks. And these seed banks development requires more resources. And also, you see, you have got this young upcoming organization like the CBOs, the CSOs on the ground. Is there a way that we can just work hand in hand directly with this young organization than preferred working with the government directly? Thank you very much.
Can I ask you to respond also using your experience from the work that you've been doing with youth and indigenous groups, and then afterwards I'll ask Nitya to also say. Barbara, you first.
Pardon?
It will be Professor Burlingham who will take the floor and reply to your answer, to your question, Patrick. Thank you.
Okay.
Well, I don't have a very specific answer except to do all the things that you're doing. I would say that what you're talking about, all these issues, are relevant to every UN agency consultation for which they put out a call for comment and these open consultations. So, for example, right now, there is an open consultation with the high-level panel of experts on artificial intelligence and data governance. Everything that you mentioned can be relevant to that, and I would encourage you to have a look at that open call for comment. It closes tomorrow, so it's for you. It will be a tight time frame, even though it's been open for many weeks. And make your voice heard through that, and this is will then be considered by the high-level panel of experts in their report that will be a very important report that will go to the CFS and then be widely distributed. And I would say I particularly neglected, I think, in many of these consultations is one of the issues that you mentioned, seed banks. I think that is of critical importance to the transformation of food systems. So I would encourage you to comment regularly, assert your agency, even though consultation isn't necessarily agency, but it's a continuum, and it can lead to getting an actual seat at a decision-making table. Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara. And Nitya, may I?
Yeah, just a small comment, Patrick, to add to what Barbara said. I think all the things that you're doing and that CSOs are doing on the ground, I think we need to make sure that they're documented and visible and put on the table. So I think agency is about negotiation, about making different voices heard, about diversity, which Hilal mentioned under DEI. It's very critical. So I think that it's also our responsibility as citizens of different countries to make sure that this knowledge, whether it's women's knowledge, whether it's indigenous knowledge, whether it's young people's knowledge, that this is not lost, that this is put on the table. And I think there is now growing recognition, especially around indigenous knowledges and so on, that in the context of climate change in particular, that women did conserve seeds which were much more climate resilient, which were locally adapted, which were drought resistant, and so on. And I think there is now more conversation happening also with scientific organizations like the CGIAR and so on. I have been working in a project in Kenya, actually, with the National Agricultural Research System. And I think this connection of the natural agricultural system, they're really disconnected with the farmers. And I think we've tried to make some sort of workshops and things to bring them to sort of talk to farmers to see this is what the National Agricultural System seeds they're producing. What do you think about it? Is this what fits for you, doesn't fit for you, and bring these people into conversation with each other. So I think at the end of the day, we can't leave the government out. There has to be a dialogue with the states.
Thank you, Nitya. Ludovica, can we go to another question?
Yes, we do actually have another hand raised. I will leave the floor to Kamaru Abubakari. Please, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon from Ghana. I think this is an interesting topic that you discuss about agency all over food systems. I think most of our agriculture system is being characterized by I think smallholder farmers who are not really educated. Yes, Hilal mentioned about social, how everybody can be socially inclusive, but can we also look at our farmers being educationally inclusive? That is what I wanted to find out, if this is something that as a farmer being part of the agency, you should be educationally capable in order for you to be able to contribute to a lot of things when it comes to agency, because most of our top government do not consider these farmers when it comes to their opinions, because they are not educated due to their status being a smallholder farmer. So in case it is something that if it can be placed into policy, that most of their farmers, even if our government can help them, educate them to a certain level for them to have inclusivity with respect to policies when it comes to food systems, because they are the most producers of our food, especially when it comes to Ghana. Most of our food that come into the cities are mostly smallholder farmers. This is something that I think if we can discuss about, especially with our developing countries, or the middle and then the small countries that we have here in Africa. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kamaru. Would one of the speakers like to comment?
I think this is the comment that is rightly so. Not only access something, but access to education for all. That's the most important. What we have been talking about. Yeah, very good comment. That's important.
And if I can just quickly add, I think also, Kamara, that was very useful. But I think now, for example, in food systems, I think it's well recognized that knowledge is different from just educational credential. So a lot of people may have traditional knowledge, different kinds of knowledge through experience as well, and not necessarily very well educated. But I think you're absolutely right that because they're not educated, we don't kind of give them value for the knowledge that they have. So I think that is again one of the hierarchy that needs to be broken and that needs to be facilitated.
And Barbara, you have some experience with this in working with indigenous groups.
Yes. Sorry. Yeah, I think that the seat at the table for agency need not have anything to do with education or rural urban connection or any of those things. And with indigenous peoples, there are many different groups within a country. I would correct myself, and I note that Paula from the High Level Panel of Experts put a note in there. It's not the artificial intelligence and data governance consultation that finishes tomorrow. It is the indigenous peoples consultation that finishes tomorrow. And it was a few days or a few weeks ago that the artificial intelligence one finished. So again, even more relevant to what the two participants said in their interventions. Have a look at that. There have been maybe not that many respondents, and I'm not sure, I didn't analyze it for things related to women farmers or some of the issues that were raised. But in the consultation on indigenous peoples, for example, there were submissions from at least almost half the contributors as individuals. and then many from civil society and academia, and fewer from government. So I think that these are areas where agency can be claimed by people concerned about very specific issues. But then also the national pathways. You have a national convener responsible to you if you are a national of that country, and you can make interventions with that person, know who that person is. It's all on the website. And in the near future, I think many countries will be updating their national pathways. And it might be a good opportunity to engage with that national convener to implement or to incorporate some of these things. And then you can hold them responsible as the policymaker and the holder of the ultimate agency for accountability.
Thank you so much, Barbara. Please do join me in thanking Barbara, Hilal, and Nitya for the very thoughtful and substantive contributions. And I thank you all, but your participants, for joining this webinar. We are reminded that agency is central to food systems transformation for all. We are also reminded of the power of all people. We do hope that agency and other aspects presented in this webinar will be fundamental, as Barbara mentioned, as countries advance with their national food system pathways. On behalf of the Scientific Advisory Committee and the UN Food Systems Coordination Hub, I thank you once again for your participation in this webinar. Please do contact us and invite us to work with you in ensuring that food systems transformation truly works for all. Thank you so very much.